This video is an excerpt from our new book, Explaining Brexit: The Ultimate Guide. You can pre-order it now at a discounted price, link in description. When the UK electorate went to the polling booths in June 2016, they were asked, should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? 52% of people said yes, and the Brexit process was initiated. However, as the day of Brexit draws ever nearer, people seem more in favour of getting another vote on the outcome of Brexit. So will there be another referendum on Brexit? And what would happen if there was a second referendum? The original question posed to the British people was very vague. It was a simple in-out choice. This gave the electorate no real opportunity to tell the government what kind of Brexit they wanted. 17,410,742 people voted to leave the EU in the referendum. Amongst those were people who wanted to see the UK leave the EU without any deals or trade agreements, the hardest form of Brexit possible. However, also included in that total are people who wanted to see a much softer form of Brexit, those who may support the UK staying in the single market or customs union. So before you jump into the comments section and say, I voted for Brexit, I want to see the UK leave and cut all ties, or say, stop ignoring the will of the people, we voted to leave, now let's get on with it. These comments are untrue. They're also spelt far too correctly to be realistic YouTube comments, but more importantly, they're untrue. The British public may have voted for Brexit, but Leave voters didn't all want the same form of Brexit. Saying that you want one form of Brexit doesn't automatically mean that everyone else also wants the same thing. The vote wasn't for the UK to cut all ties, the vote was for the UK to leave. On top of that, the referendum had a 72% turnout, meaning that nearly 13 million registered voters didn't vote in the 2016 referendum. Therefore, when people say 52% of the British electorate wanted to leave the EU, this isn't really true. Only 37% of the registered electorate actually voted to leave, and only 27% of the total population. This has left a lot of unsatisfied people. Many of those who voted to leave feel that the negotiations aren't going the way they'd hoped, while some of those who didn't vote at all are beginning to wish they had. Recent data from Sky Data backs this up, with only 10% of those surveyed believing that the government is doing a good job of the negotiation process. On top of this, the same survey shows that a meagre 14% of respondents are optimistic that the government will be able to secure a good deal. With support this low, it's clear that even those who were in favour of Brexit back in 2016 aren't happy with how things are going currently. So what is the solution to this high level of discontent? Some are saying that a second referendum could help heal the wounds. The logic behind holding a second referendum is that doing so allows the British people another chance to have their say on Brexit. In the last 2 years, a lot has changed and it's become clearer what being outside of the EU will mean for the UK. Therefore, those in favour of a second referendum say that it would allow the British people to have a final sign-off on the process they started. And this isn't just about Remain voters having another chance at the referendum. This process would also allow Leave voters to ensure the British exit is the kind of Brexit they were looking for initially. The proposed second referendum would therefore have 3 options, giving the electorate more choice than they had back in 2016. This time round, the options are said to be accept the government's deal with the EU, leave the EU without a deal, or remain in the EU. A referendum like this grants voters the opportunity to give a final stamp of approval to the government's deal, and that makes sense. As we previously discussed, the original referendum didn't allow the public to demonstrate any opinions besides in or out. Voting again on the final deal allows the electorate to show if the kind of Brexit that's been negotiated by the government is actually what they wanted. Simultaneously, it allows voters to stick to their guns and vote for a hard Brexit, or no Brexit at all. Having a referendum like this is predicated on the assumption that the UK government will be able to reach an agreement with the EU. Looking at what's happened so far, that's far from certain. In our video Brexit So Far, we discussed the limited success the UK government has had in negotiations. It's very possible that the UK could leave the EU without a deal, in which case a second referendum would be limited to the choice of, never mind, let's leave anyway. Or, well, that failed, let's just stay in the EU. If you want to find out more about what's happened so far with Brexit, or what will happen if the UK doesn't reach a deal, there are links to those videos in the description too. In the video about what's happened so far, you'd learn that Parliament has already put in place a law which requires Parliament to have the final say on any deals. This means that even without a second referendum, the New Deal would still need to be approved before passing. Parliament's role is to act as the voice of the people in government, and some argue that this alone is enough to ensure that the New Deal represents the people's will. If the members of Parliament in the House of Commons don't believe that the New Deal fits the needs of their constituents, they can vote against the deal in Parliament. This leads some to say there shouldn't be another referendum. The argument is that the public has already voted once. Now it should be left to the professional, elected politicians to work out what happens next. The purpose of a representative democracy is that politicians vote on behalf of the public. Exactly so the electorate doesn't have to weigh in on every issue. It's also worth considering that the UK doesn't have much time left. As we discussed in our video The Future of Brexit, the days until the UK has to leave are ticking down, and the UK still has a lot to do before it's ready to leave or reach a deal. If the UK isn't able to negotiate a deal until the last few months, there will be very little time left to hold a referendum on the deal. To be useful, votes like this can't be rushed. The original Brexit referendum took 7 months to be approved by Parliament. On top of that, the British people need time to fully understand what they're being asked and learn what the deal would mean for them. This takes up time which the UK already has precious little of. Partly because of this, the government said that there won't be a second referendum. Downing Street recently said that a second referendum won't happen in any circumstances. A large percentage of the population support this, saying that the people have already spoken and that the will of the people should be followed. Regardless of what people specifically wanted out of Brexit, it's clear that in the 2016 referendum, a majority of those who voted did want to see the UK leave the EU in some form. Therefore, the argument is that it will be undemocratic to go against the public's opinion as voiced in the referendum. Despite this, a lot of people seem to support a second referendum, with over 600,000 people signing a petition started by the independents calling for another referendum. This wave of support is likely encouraged by recent scandals surrounding the original referendum. The news of Russian interference, campaign finance violations, and the involvement of Cambridge Analytica have called into question the legitimacy of the first vote. Christopher Wiley of Cambridge Analytica proclaimed that he believed that Leave wouldn't have won if it weren't for targeted data technology. Despite him being a supporter of the Leave campaign, Wiley went on to say that the referendum wasn't fair or legitimate, and if it had happened in Nigeria or Zimbabwe, the EU would have demanded a rerun. This leads some to say that the only way to rectify these issues is to rerun the referendum, this time with stricter regulations. Sky Data, whose survey we discussed earlier, also asked their respondents how they would vote if there was a second referendum. 48% of people said they'd vote to stay in the EU, 27% would support a no-deal Brexit, and 13% were in favour of the government's deal. Currently it's unclear what the government's deal will end up being, or if a deal will even be reached, but it shows how little faith people have in the government's progress. While it appears that a second referendum would result in the UK remaining in the EU, we still don't have all the information, so polls like this only hold limited accuracy. What do you think? Should the UK have another referendum? And would you vote any differently this time round? Let us know what you think in the comments. Explaining Brexit, the Ultimate Guide is our new book which aims to explain every aspect of Brexit. We want to cover everything you could possibly want to know, so we're looking for your questions to answer. Comment below any questions you have and we may be able to answer them in the book or an upcoming video. The book is released on paperback and Kindle on September 21st. You can pre-order the Kindle version now at a discounted price. The link's in the description.